So we're talking about the big five relationships, and last week Andy talked about healing from toxic relationships, and so this week I'm kind of talking about healthy friendships. And it's funny, I was talking to Rob yesterday after Food Pantry. He's like, friendships are like food pantries. Sometimes you're the one giving out, and sometimes you're the one in need of receiving. I was like, okay, yeah, sure thing, Rob. But I thought it was good. There's just, when we think about friendships, we think about a lot of different things like guys and gals. Friendship looks a lot different. Like my friends back home, if you would have listened in on the conversation, you probably would have thought we hated each other. Just the way we picked on each other and, some of the language those guys used. But that's how sometimes men, we show affection. I was at work one day, and my best friend in the whole world, a guy named Eric, who lives down in Texas, he and I work together, and we're chit-chatting. Another guy comes up, he's like, yeah, man, today's the anniversary, and he pulls up his sleeve, and there's this big old giant scar, like on both sides of his shoulder. He's like, yep, my best friend stabbed me in the shoulder. We were at the bar, and we got to argue. I think they argued about, football or something. But one guy pulls out a knife and stabs him in the shoulder. He's like, yeah, we laugh about that every time we're together. I turned to my buddy Eric. I was like, just take note. If my best friend ever stabs me in the shoulder with a knife, we are no longer best friends. So we're just going to clear that up right now. Having a friend, being in a relationship with someone, having a friendship, throughout the course of history, there have been some famous best friends. And I pulled up a couple pictures of some famous, best friends, like Han and Chewie, for example. These guys joined, through thick and thin, through galaxy after galaxy, Gandalf and Frodo. That's like me and Dr. Ree up there right there. Ponch and John, these guys were inseparable. And Crockett and Tubbs, who could forget the friendship of Crockett and Tubbs, right? These guys, fighting the good fight. They're Captain America and Bucky. Despite some hardships, Captain America and Bucky remain true friends. And Captain America saw the heart behind that metal arm of Bucky's. Batman and Robin, those guys fighting crime together in horrible suits. Woody and Buzz, Dwight and Jim, they may have seemed like adversaries, but deep down, their relationship was pure, and they loved each other. Bill and Ted, how could you not be friends when you're on an excellent adventure? Wayne and Garth, they're partying on. And then finally, Nick, Schmidt, and Winston. Guys living together, even after they're married. That's friendship right there. So we're talking about healthy friendship and what healthy friendship looks like in the context of a biblical relationship. C.S. Lewis once said, friendship is unnecessary. Like art, like philosophy, it has no survival value. Rather, it is one of those things which gives value to survival. And the famous philosopher once said, if you want to have friends, be a friend. That would be my mom. So we, and I personally, talk about friendship, I personally have been blessed throughout my life to have better friends than I deserve. If you guys have heard the long version of my story, back in 2011, I was in a pretty bad motorcycle crash that landed me in the hospital for a week and in a wheelchair for 2 months. And when I had the crash, the first person I called was my buddy Eric. I was like, hey man, can you bring the trailer? I just had a wreck. He's like, oh yeah. And I was like, yeah, and I think I need to go to the hospital. And so he gets to the wreck site, and by then an ambulance had picked me up and they're loading me. And as they're loading me on the ambulance, I'm like, oh, hey, Eric, by the way, call Tabitha, tell her I'm okay. Tabitha being my wife. And so when I'm rolling around the side of the highway and the first person I call is I don't even call my wife, I call Eric. And so, and then through that season, Eric and others really blessed us by helping out. And even recently, my wife and I moved moved into a new house. Who really hates moving? I really hate moving, but I am extremely thankful for all those that showed up to help throw furniture in the back of a truck and unload it and put it in the house. It's one of those things that, like, you know who your friends are when they show up to help move. And I fed them brisket afterwards, and so I hope that was worth it. What's funny is about moving, like, I was looking for my beard trimmers last night because I was getting a little furry on the sides, and I had no idea where they were. Because, we moved a week ago, and most things are still in boxes. And so, like, my toiletries were kept in this cabinet in the bathroom. I found a bunch of things from this one cabinet in 3 different boxes, but yet not my beard trimmers. I looked for my beard trimmers for like an hour. And so then I started going back and looking at the places I already looked, and sure enough, they were there in one of the places I already looked. So, but yeah, I hate moving. But I'm just very thankful for friends that would help move. I've been on the receiving end more than I've been on the giving end probably, and so I'm very thankful for that. So last week, Andy talked about the toxic relationship of David and Saul. It was, wrought with jealousy and hatred and anger, and everything David did, Saul seemed to hate because David was so good at it. And that was, kind of a perfect example of a toxic relationship. The other side of that, which is really cool, I think, an example of just a healthy giving friendship would be David and Jonathan, Saul's son. And so there's, through the story of David and Jonathan, I picked up a couple different characteristics. Now, these aren't all the characteristics of a healthy friendship, but I just picked out a couple characteristics of healthy friendship. A healthy friendship is unconditional. Love of one for another is just unconditional. Whether someone is an Eagles fan or a Giants fan, you can still be friends with that person. It takes extra grace. And especially for like Patriots fans, it takes a lot of extra grace, but you can still be friends with those people. And so in 1 Samuel chapter 18, verses 1 through 4, after David had finished talking with Saul, Jonathan became one in spirit with David, and he loved him as himself. So like in the timeline of David, this is right after David had killed Goliath with a slingshot. Imagine this big old giant behemoth of a man that all these trained warriors were afraid of. And this one, teenager, David, went out there unafraid and slaughtered this giant. And so I can imagine like the scene. He's like coming into the palace. He's probably a mess because he's holding the head of Goliath with him. And this is the image that Jonathan gets of David. Now, David was in the palace a lot because David could play the harp. Despite the popular opinion, musicians can be tough, right? That's it. There you go. Trevor's way. So I'm kidding. David would have been known in the palace, but at that point, like Jonathan and David may not have known each other very well. It doesn't really specify, but now David is in the inner court with Saul and all the generals and the high-ranking people of the army because David just slaughtered Goliath, and he's got his head with him. And Jonathan, it says he became one in spirit with David, and he loved him as himself. And it says, from that day, Saul kept David with him and did not let him return home to his family. And Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as himself. And Jonathan took off his robe he was wearing and gave it to David, along with his tunic, his sword, his bow, and his belt. Jonathan is saying, what's mine is yours. We are connected forever now. This relationship between us can never be broken. David and Jonathan and David would have been a lot younger than Jonathan, but yet David slaying Goliath made an impact on Jonathan and the heart of David. And Jonathan would have seen the heart of David. And really, like, not only are friendships unconditional, they can be unlikely. Jonathan was a prince and a warrior. Like, he himself, not that long ago, slaughtered 20 Philistines on his own. He and his armor bearer went out in the middle of the night. Nobody knew where they were going. In 300 style, they killed 20 men and really sent the Philistine camp into a frenzy. And so, Jonathan was no schlub. Like, he was a warrior. He was the prince. He was the heir to the throne. And yet, here comes this young boy, David, who Jonathan would later realize would be the successor to the throne, the successor to Saul, and be taking Jonathan's space. In normal life, like Jonathan should have had animosity towards David. Jonathan should have hated him for his success and hated him for, who he was. But yet Jonathan, the prince and the warrior, still loved David. And David was almost the opposite. He was a shepherd, he was a musician, and now he's a warrior as well. In that culture, that time, a shepherd and a high-ranking official never would have been friends, ever. My son likes to watch the show Unlikely Animal Friends about like a cat and a bear hanging out. That's kind of what it's like. It's like these two, the very most unlikely of people to be friends, have developed this strong bond. And that's like, it says a lot about the character. The Bible says David was a man after God's own heart. I think this friendship shows a lot about the character of Jonathan as well. That he was able to see the heart of David, and despite their differences, despite what the culture would have said, they should have never been friends, Jonathan still loved him as himself. True godly friendships are unconditional and at times unlikely. Another characteristic you find in here is that healthy friendships are supportive of one another. Andy talked last week of David and Saul and how Saul was so jealous of David and all his success. The opposite is true for David and Jonathan. If you look in 1 Samuel chapter 18, verses 5 through 9, it says, "Whatever mission Saul sent him on, David was so successful that Saul gave him a high rank in the army. This pleased all the troops and Saul's officers as well. When the men were returning home after David killed the Philistines, the women came out from all the towns of Israel to meet King Saul, singing and dancing the joyful songs. Saul has slain his thousands and David his 10,000s. It says Saul was very angry. And so even though Saul hated David for this seemed to also solidify Jonathan and David's relationship even more. When Jonathan should be jealous, by all accounts, a normal person might be really upset, like, my dad's the king. I should be the high-ranking official in the army, not David. People should be singing, Jonathan slayed his 10,000s. Instead of being super jealous, Jonathan just kind of dug in, and their relationship got stronger and stronger. David was promoted to the head of the armies, and Jonathan was supportive through all of it. See, healthy friendships, we want to see our friends grow. We want to see our friends succeed. We want to see our friends move into health. And a lot of times, Andy talked about toxic relationships. A lot of times, when Andy shared his story, when he was trying to leave all that stuff behind and get sober, he talked about some of his friends didn't want to hang out with him anymore. They were real judgmental to him. And so, as a true friend, someone who wants to keep you down, or a true friend is someone who wants to see you succeed and see you lifted up. Jonathan wanted to see David succeed through this. And it's not just successes. Your true friends will support you through your failures and through your trials. If you move into 1 Samuel chapter 19, verses 1 through 7, it said, Saul told his son Jonathan and all the attendants to kill David, but Jonathan had taken a great liking to David and warned him, my father Saul is looking for a chance to kill you. Be on your guard tomorrow morning. Go into hiding and stay there, and I will go and stand with my father in the field where you are, and I will speak to him about you, and I will tell you what I find out. In verse 4 it says, Jonathan spoke well of David to Saul, his father, and said to him, let not the king do wrong to his servant David. He has not wronged you, and what he has done has benefited you greatly. He took his life into his own hands when he killed the Philistines. The Lord has won a great victory for Israel, and you saw it and were glad. Then why do you do wrong to an innocent man like David by killing him for no reason? So Jonathan, even in private, even when David wasn't around, see, it's easy when people aren't around to be like, yeah, that guy's kind of a jerk. We should definitely kill him. It's easy when he's not around, when the people are not around to kind of like go with the flow and agree with someone. Have you guys ever been around someone who was talking bad about someone that you're close to, or someone you know, or someone you like? It's kind of easy to be like, yeah, man, that guy, Michael, his hair's so long. I can't believe that guy. You know, or Damon, he's so bald. You know, it's easy to just kind of get into that, to like join the negative attitude. You know, it's like a box of fruit. If you've got like this one rotten fruit, like all the fruit around it will start rotting as well. It is too easy to just go with the flow. The difficult thing is to say, no, man, Michael's an awesome guy. His hair makes him look like Thor. I love Michael. And Damon's bald head is a solar panel for awesome. And so it's a difficult thing to do, but we need to like support our friends when they're not around. And that's exactly what David is doing to Saul. I mean, that's exactly what Jonathan is doing to Saul when David is not around. Jonathan's like, man, you don't want to kill David. He slaughtered all those Philistines. He makes you look good. And so, Jonathan is really trying to pump up David to his father Saul, who is clear that their relationship is deteriorating. It's very clear that Saul is beginning to hate David and have animosity and jealousy towards him. But Jonathan, despite Saul being his family, is saying, no, David is my friend. I love him as I love myself, and I'm going to support and lift him up. I mean, Jonathan saves his life in this instance, right? And so Jonathan didn't take the opportunity to tear him down. He took the opportunity to lift him up in front of others. Another characteristic we see is loyalty. You know, good friends are loyal. Like you see it right here, like Jonathan is loyal to David despite his father wanting to kill him. You know, there's a saying out there that friends are the family we choose. Because how many of you guys have dysfunctional family? And when you have dysfunctional, when you have dysfunctional, or if your family's not real close, they don't have to be dysfunctional, they just not be real close. Your friends become your family unit. Like my wife and I, we're from Texas, here in Colorado. We've become family-like close with a lot of people here because our family, proximity-wise, is far. And so our friends are the family we choose. And you go back and you look at that passage I just read. Jonathan is breaking ties with the family, essentially, and giving his loyalty to David and not his loyalty to his family. In chapter 20, I'm not going to read it. The whole story of chapter 20 is like, again, Saul wanted to kill David. And David's like, bro, your dad wants to kill me. And Jonathan's like, no, wait, dude, no. I would know if dad wanted to kill you. But by this point, Saul kind of sees Jonathan and David's relationship. So, Saul's kind of like cutting Jonathan out of some family information because he doesn't want David to be tipped off, but David was tipped off anyway. And David was like, bro, I'm telling you, your dad wants to kill me. And so Jonathan said, all right, tell you what, there's a big feast coming up. You're going to skip it. You're going to go hide somewhere. And if dad gets really mad, he wants to kill you. But if he's super chill about it, you're all good. So as it turns out, David skips these feasts. And, Saul's like, well, where's David? Because Saul wanted to kill David at this meal. And Jonathan says, well, David's not here. And Saul picks up a spear and hucks it at Jonathan. Hucks it at his own son because he hated David so much. And Jonathan later, they had kind of arranged a signal with some arrows or whatever. So Jonathan had to go back out and let David know, hey, yeah, dude, my dad's trying to kill you. You need to split. And so, Jonathan, despite his father trying to kill him, remained loyal to David. Jonathan put it all on the line. And in 1 Samuel 23, 15 through 18, it says, while David was at Horesh in the desert of Ziph, he learned that Saul had come out to take his life. And Saul's son Jonathan went to David at Horesh and helped him find strength. So Jonathan goes to David and encourages him and helps give him strength and helps build him up. And Jonathan, it says, don't be afraid, he said. My father Saul will not lay a hand on you. You will be king over Israel, and I will be second to you. Even my father Saul knows this. The two of them made a covenant before the Lord, and Jonathan went home, but David remained in Horesh. And the last point I'm going to make is healthy friendships are also sacrificial. They're giving more than they're taking. Jonathan gave up his right to be king. Jonathan gave up his right to be the head of the armies. Jonathan gave David his armor, his robe, his shield, his sword. He gave everything to David. And he went to David and he said, you will be king and I will be second. Jonathan gave up his rightful place in the kingdom because he recognized the call that God had on David's life. And he saw the heart of David, and he knew that David was a good man. And so he pledged his allegiance to David. Instead of fighting, instead of having animosity towards David, he gave all that up. And this points to Jesus. In John chapter 15, verses 12 and 13, Jesus says, my command is this, to love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for another. In their relationship, Jonathan was literally laying down his life for David. He was literally taking spears for David. Saul could have had Jonathan killed at any moment, and he tried to have David killed several times, but yet Jonathan remained loyal and sacrificed everything that he had a right to. It would have been very easy to say that this is my right, this belongs to me. But instead, Jonathan said, no, I'm going to give this up. We've been called to love each other as Jesus loves us. We've been called to love each other as Jonathan and David loved each other. To lay down our lives, to lay down our pride, our agenda, and our rights. And those are difficult things to do. Extremely difficult things to do. Say something that I deserve, something that rightfully belongs to me, to say, no, I'm going to push this aside and I'm going to love my brother. The worship team is going to come back, right? You guys have one more song, right? I grew up in this program called Royal Rangers. It was kind of like my church's versions of the Scouts. And one of the motto things that we recited was the Golden Rule. Who knows what the Golden Rule is? It says, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Our natural inclination is to do unto others as they've done unto us. That's what we naturally want to do, right? Like, oh, this is justice. Someone wrecked my car, I'm going to wreck theirs. Someone stole my sheep, I'm going to steal their sheep. Who has sheep? But we've been called to love like Jesus. In the Gospels, there's an account when they asked Jesus, teacher, what is the greatest commandment? He said, to love your Lord God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and to love your neighbor as yourself. We've been called as brothers and sisters in Christ to put others before ourselves, to put the needs of others before ourselves, to put the rights of others before ourselves, to love unconditionally, to be supportive, to be loyal, to love sacrificially. So my encouragement to you today is this. In all your friendships, start looking at ways that you can serve and not be served. Even in the workplace, it's real easy, like when you get a job, you're like, okay, who's important? Like, who can I find that can help me advance? The difficult thing to do is, where can I serve? Where can I help? What do you need today? So my encouragement to you today is this. Look at all your relationships as an opportunity to serve, not be served. To paraphrase John Kennedy, ask not what you can do for your friends, but ask not what your friends can do for you, but for what you can do to your friends. And the other thing I want to say is this is unrelated, but during worship, I just had this sense that, Dr. Reed talks about our Sunday evening service as our set-free service. And if you've got junk, you've got baggage, please, there is freedom here. There is freedom at this cross. But that's not reserved for Sunday mornings. If you have something with you that you need freedom from, you can leave it in that trunk right there, and we will discreetly dispose of it this week. You can leave it behind and find freedom at this cross. Last summer I saw in my memories, last summer we started seeing people leaving bags of weed in there, needles, bags of heroin. People would write, pornography on a piece of paper and throw it in there. If you've got something, you don't have it with you, you can write it on a piece of paper, you can leave it in this trunk. And it almost feels like COVID threw a wrench into God's plans. Let me tell you something. One of my quirks is the expiration dates. Like, if the expiration date on the milk is July 13th, tonight at midnight, I'm pouring it down the sink. Like, I'm quirky about expiration dates. But let me tell you, God's promises, God's provisions, God calling does not have an expiration date. So if you need freedom from something, I want to encourage you, leave it in this trunk, leave it at this cross. This is where freedom is found for you today.
Thanks for tuning in to a message from the Sanctuary Church. For more information and media, go to our website at thesanctuarywestside.org or follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube.